And we were aiming for about 1,000 people. We saw about we told in the middle of selling it for about 3 months. It was slowing down. Then the venue also called in the middle of the pandemic. They said basically half of our staff in England, so they're not working. So we had to cancel the event. But it showed that it's still just about too early. A lot of people still scared. A lot of people
yeah, no, there was.
I suppose the live stream.
Yeah. Take a while.
Right, well, let me turn the food. Let me turn the food off. Doesn't a lot.
Do that, you dipshit.
Sorry.
No swearing.
I just said I was going to do something and Emily told me to do the exact same thing.
Can we say the C word? Communist? Or is that what we said? But that's not go to.
No, I'm neutral.
Just can I say Kansas?
Where's Thomas gone?
He's still my
Kansas.
Send it to Amanda.
She would actually be so happy.
Yeah.
I will
Yeah,
say,
take a cue when
moral again. Joe. Joseph.
Yeah.
Say make Britain moral again. That's my catchphrase.
Make Britain
morally.
morally. I like that.
What does that mean? That's nice. What does that mean?
It means take pay straight up.
Working. Because you knew that's something going to pick you up.
Can you take a quick pic of me?
Yeah.
Like morality, just kind of like
But you then
Yeah,
feeding
but how do you
religion.
define
not particularly.
Morality on that's right. Then go to
Oh, that's adorable.
Okay.
We can edit.
Why was it menacing? I'm not even sat next to you so you can grill me.
We haven't chosen to sit next to me at all.
Yeah. Do you want me here? Oh yeah. Yeah, no worries. There you go.
Lock it and then try and unlock it.
Yeah, sure.
Yay. Wow.
Yeah.
So it's been decided. We're going to players tonight.
And then we're just going to say,
You're thinking of players. Alice never been to players.
Got me
How many other players do you know?
Yeah.
There is players in Birmingham. Yeah. No, it's different. No.
Yeah,
I'm not going to stop it.
once I've done this, I'm going to get a hotel. Then
Don't
play.
say
I'm going to do
No, we are.
Late. Well, late. Depending on how the night goes. But yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on how the night goes.
Yeah, that's
We're
fine.
going to get a hotel. We still might, to be honest. Depends how wasted we are.
Go with the flow.
Wait, you're going to get a hotel in London?
Not London.
I'm sorry, I don't think we get a hotel in London when we live in London.
Oh, staycation in Sicily.
Live stream or you can tweet it and save it.
That's how wasted we get. That's
On
the
a night out is
only
fine.
contingency. All I can think of is I need an extra bit.
Yeah.
as a beginner, you have a look over at the live stream and just tell everyone to submit questions.
So you're speaking fast or something, yeah.
So everybody who's watching the live stream, they have to submit questions either on via
live
the live
chat?
stream, via Twitter.
Is there a hashtag?
It's just that anyway.
Hashtag
And
my2c.com.
then we're going to collate everything at the end because they have to be in the first 50 minutes.
I'm not saying it's going to happen, but is there a
It would be far easier to stream if they're watching it on a certain platform. Surely it'd be easier just to do it that way.
comments?
Through that, or they can act on Twitter because what we're going to do is we're going to collate questions.
If worse comes to worse and there is no, or there's not many,
There's already
Well, we'll just come up with something.
It'll be fine. We'll
yeah.
get
as long as
no,
there's a
because
trap.
we're also getting live.
But yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Are there more people outside?
No. You
Okay, I'll get hello.
Are there more people outside?
no one's in.
Huh? Well, who's people?
I just drew on you. I do apologise. Well, you went into it, to be honest.
So you're saying the question. That's basically the question.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's basically what he said.
Yeah.
I don't have any bra fans. What, you mean like how you wrote that there?
Yeah, but not exactly. These are just pointers. It just happens to be.
You shouldn't give me
This is
You're giving me a script that say don't use this.
Yeah, you are live, by the way, on YouTube.
Huh?
Is the sound?
Guess who? Emily.
Yeah,
Guess who gave my number to? Yeah.
I know. Because he went from me.
Ah.
How is this the first we're hearing about this?
Well, I haven't been down in ages.
Live on YouTube, just stop.
Subscribe.
Is this the live cam? That's not okay.
What do you mean it's not okay? It's okay. Well, it's not my business, it's his job. I don't need to know. Yeah, his own stuff, yeah.
What's he doing? Filming children?
What, you're basically a child. How old are you again? 22?
if you want to come and sit down here, just one throw in front of us.
That's
Jake, are these microphones linked up to the computer?
Yeah, everyone can hear you and see you now.
It's live now.
This is why the writing of the came down.
Oh yeah, I was tapping my mouth.
You just said it again.
We'll take on distribute
There goes my membership to the Conservative Party.
Cancel conference is a no-go.
Take pics anyway.
Stop it, Emily.
I'm going to cheat and get the notes from him.
Yeah.
Yeah, what she said.
Have you got Joseph's phone number?
I do.
Do you want to ring him up and tell him ask him where he is?
Was he not? He was listening. What?
He was still there.
I can't. Can I phone him?
Yeah.
Trying to, Emily. Blimey.
Fucking hell. Just
I'm looking nervous, like breakdowns not muttering.
You are?
He's not like.
Oh, he's there.
Oh, right.
Don't worry about it. If you just want to fill up the rows, sorry, are you alright to move down that middle row? And then if you run out of room, you might have to come to the front here. Small ones at back, small ones at front. I love it.
I'm not scared of the front.
I love it.
Yeah, if you want to sit by Ollie.
This is alright. What I wanted. I wanted my 6 points to like.
Look at me.
Are we all good?
It's the winter. It's the south. It's warm inside. It's horrible. It's sweaty.
It's alright. So, welcome everybody to the Conservative Climate. My name's Olivia Lever. I'm the director of Blue Beyond. This is Joseph Robertson from Orthodox Conservatism.
Good to meet you guys.
So yeah, thank you all for coming. So before we just kick off, our lovely host Lacey and Emily will be talking through the structure. But just a reminder before we start, no heckling please. We will be running a zero tolerance policy. If you are to be caught heckling, you will be chucked out and removed from the event. We will be keeping an eye throughout the event.
And just on that as well, the reason why is zero heckling, mainly obviously you can applaud, do whatever you want, but the panelists have got a very, very short amount of time. They've literally got like 2-3 minutes to make their points each time. So we're going to try and get around it as quickly as possible. The second half of the event is where you guys can get your live questions in. So we're going to have some coming through from the live stream, a few coming through on social media. You guys at the interval can come up, there'll be somebody going around. So if anybody does want to take a live question, you just list those and we'll take like the first 6 or 7 that we get, as many as we can get through. So yeah, you'll all have a chance. Yeah.
And you can also submit questions where you can ask them yourself if you want any of us to ask them. More than welcome to do that as well.
Yeah, if you want to submit them anonymously, same thing.
Yes, good stuff. And we'll get started.
Yeah.
Perfect stuff. Thank you.
Enjoy.
Enjoy.
Right, hello and welcome. As you've already heard, my name is Emily Hewitson.
And I'm Lacey Butcher, and we are your lovely hosts for today. First of all, we just want to thank the University of Birmingham so much for allowing us to have us here in this venue. And of course to the Mallard, the Orthodox Conservatives and Blue Beyond for putting this whole event together.
So just to give you a quick rundown of how things are going to work, the event is going to be split into two 50-minute halves. The first half will be for the panellists to express their points and discuss amongst themselves. And the second half, we will be opening up the floor to your questions. So we will look forward to that.
Yeah, so we do want it to be as interactive as possible. So if you are watching on the live stream, hello everybody. Do submit your questions on, if you're watching it on Facebook or whatever, or you can @ on Twitter any of the relevant what are they called? Orthodox, Blue Beyond, etc. And we will put those forward. Please do that before the break. Anyone here, you can either find Joseph or Olivia during the interval. They can take your questions and go from there. But as quickly covered, we want it to be civilised and tame, but we do want a lively and healthy debate. So,
yeah. So let's introduce our panel.
First up, we have Jake Scott. Jake Scott is a doctoral researcher of political theory at the University of Birmingham, specialising in phenomenological study of populism. He is a specialist in ideological theory, conservative philosophy and post-Marxism. He had been published in The Imaginative Conservative, Merriam West, Country Squire and many others. His recent paper, There Is No Alternative, The Role of Depoliticisation on the Emergence of Populism, is available in the PSA Politics Journal.
And next up, we have Shawsha Duffy. He is a PR associate from London, heading up work around employment, diversity and inclusion. Formerly, he worked in local government on both the Thurrock Fairness Commission, examining the provision of services, and then later on the Services Scrutiny Board. He considers himself to be left of the Conservative Party.
Then we have Casey Byrne. He is a politics and international relations student at the University of Reading. He's a graphics analyst for Blue Beyond and a political commentator. He's a member of the Conservatives for over 4 years, feeling at home in the moderate One Nation wing of the party, and believes this path is the way to ensure the Conservatives survive as a modern party and one that puts the people first and party second.
And then next up we have Chloe Grant. She is the North East Regional Chairman of the Conservative Women's Organisation. She is also a Newcastle University PhD student in immunology. She has recently worked at the Home Office where she was working on domestic abuse.
To my left we have Luke Doherty, marvellous. He's the chairman of the Orthodox Conservatives and co-director at St Edmunds Media. He read modern history and politics at Cardiff University and has a particular interest in cultural conservatism and post-liberalism. Luke is very much a fan of Roger Scruton's school of philosophy and has coined the phrase social conservatism as a sensible choice for ordinary people. As well as being actively engaged in his local constituency, he's written for a number of leading conservative publications and contributed to the public debate on conservatism.
And then next up we have Maya Tusi. He is a political broadcaster and host of the Maya Tusi Show. He's a libertarian-leaning conservative. He moved to the UK from Iran as a child with his mother, who was a political refugee. Prior to his media career, Maya was heavily active in the Conservative Party, holding various positions. He was also a big Eurosceptic and was part of the Vote Leave campaign.
Next up, we have Alice Grant, who is the Education and Institutes lead for the Orthodox Conservatives. She became heavily involved in the Vote Leave campaign, making regular media appearances and gaining considerable traction online. She's contributed to various panel discussions and given interviews including the New Cultural Forum, BBC Top Table and the Bruges Group, alongside written commentary from various on-site publications. She was due to stand at the Conservative Party local elections last year, but instead chose to go into higher education and pursue a degree in ancient history at Magdalen College, Oxford. Alice also works on initiatives important to her Catholic faith.
And last but certainly not least is Samuel Martin. He is the editor-in-chief of the Mallard and the initiator of both the Utopia Project and the Rogues Gallery. He has a long-standing interest in political theory and philosophy. His writing can be found at the Mallard and his personal blog, Sporadic Meditations.
So the key to this debate, each panellist will have 3 minutes to discuss the main borders of their argument, discussing the Conservative Party, where it is and where ultimately it should be going, or what they hope the direction it should be going in.
And then afterwards, after everyone, after we go around everyone and they've given their 3 minutes, we will allow for some pushbacks. So that's where things should get a bit more heated, I hope.
Hopefully.
But we are going to be really strict on timings in the interest of fairness. So without further ado, over to our first panellist, Jake Scott.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's quite common that I make an esoteric reference. So it's often said of Hannibal Barca that he knew how to gain a victory but not how to use it. I think much can be said of the same of the Conservative Party. Every time the Conservative Party wins a general election, it either entrenches or deepens the socialist project of the Liberal or Social or Labour Party governments that preceded it. Consider 2003, the Communications Act. Well, what did the Conservative Party do when it gained power? It's proposed the Snoopers Charter. During the Labour government of 1997 to 2010, they passed a series of laws prohibiting discrimination in employment, which were important changes, but arguably altered the fundamental fabric of society. So what did the Conservative Party do in 2010? Pass the Equality Act. Every single time the Conservative Party gains power, it does nothing to reverse the previous government, it simply accepts it and moves on. But the deeper problem, in my opinion, with the supposedly conservative and unionist party of Great Britain is it does nothing to talk about Great Britain as an historical and cultural entity. There is vague overtures to diversity and inclusion and tolerance as principles of British life. Well, that's not necessarily historically true, but even if it were, that does not make Britain unique. There are many nations, 20 or so in Europe alone, that hold those values to be true. Instead of talking about genuine British values, from constitutional monarchy and parliamentarianism to ambition and entrepreneurship through to religious freedom, the Conservative Party doesn't do any of that. What does it do instead? It puts a large English flag outside of number 10 Downing Street during the UEFA Championship. What the Conservative Party needs to do moving forward is regain some sense of Britishness. That's what it needs to do.
And up next we have Shorsha Datti.
So, conservatism, as the name suggests, is about conserving, and often it feels that the Conservative Party does not do much of that. The trouble is that I find, if we did a straw poll of the room in here, I think we'd find we're all conservative or sympathetic. We're all monarchists, for example, as well. But yet a lot of these views for our generation are not the majority. And why is that? Because people feel at odds with the current system. If the government wins the next election with an increased majority, by the time they leave office, it will be the longest time a single party has held government since 1761. And besides Brexit, what will be its big achievement? What will it have done under its own volition? What focus will it have made? Unlike the Labour government before, John Major's government had no majority, arguably, so couldn't really get much done. But then you had Thatcherism that left its mark, and yet we're looking at almost 30 years in government, potentially by the time we leave, and nothing achieved. At the same time, we're risking alienating an entire generation of people coming up by completely neglecting them. If you look at young people, predominantly said, if we want to conserve the monarchy, our institutions, our culture, our way of life, we are at the same time building an entire generation that predominantly thinks that that's nonsense and it needs scrapping. And why is that? Because it neglects them. They cannot afford to buy their own homes, so they are either renting shoeboxes or living with their parents in towns that haven't seen investment for decades. They cannot start their own families. They are, pardon me, excited, stifled by a number of different laws affecting if they want to start businesses and tax regulations. They're stifled by the reality that opportunity for this generation doesn't seem to be the opportunities that our parents and grandparents have had. And the government seems keen to continue to go, keep going for boomers, keep going for boomers, keep going for boomers, neglecting that when the next generation comes in, it will fundamentally scrap everything we have fought to conserve. And so I would argue that the best course of action would be to pivot, to look into winning young people over, and if that means making slight incremental liberal changes with the hope of winning them on side and trying to conserve as much as possible rather than risking throwing the baby out with the bathwater, then that is the direction that we need to take.
And next we have Casey.
So where are we now? We've had 4 general election victories in a row, an opposition which can't win, and like us, it doesn't know where it's going or where it wants to go. We've got used to winning. We've won 4 elections in a row and likely a 5th. So why fix what isn't broken? Whilst it's not broken, we still need to hammer down the future. And to use a metaphor, we need to put a route into the sat-nav so we know where we're going to set the destination. Now we are driving and ending up at the right places. And luck will eventually run out. So it's time to put that route in the sat-nav, but where is that route? Firstly, we've got to leave behind the things such as culture wars, because all they do is divide, and they have no positive outcomes at all. We've got to sit down together like we're doing now, and figure out who we are, and who we want to be in the future. So where must we go if we have any chance of governing and any chance of winning? We must be the party that's tough on crime, that spends responsibly, cares for the NHS, restores our country's prestige, and protects the rights of all citizens, whoever they are. It's time to decide. It's time to put the One Nation election-winning route into the sat-nav and get going.
Can I just quickly implore all people to speak up, because we've only got 2 microphones, so just project as best as you can.
And next we have Chloe.
Thank you. So I'm from the northeast, if you can tell, and the northeast has been a very big focus of the party right now. Recently, over the past few years, the opinions of the party and people of the northeast has changed massively, and we became somewhat of a focus. In the 2019 general election, we won so many more seats than we've ever won before. The people in the northeast want change, and the party have promised to deliver that. The party has 2 very big focuses at the moment. It's to level up and it's to reach net zero. I feel in the northeast, the reaching net zero kind of comes with the levelling up agenda. We've seen tons of more investment and jobs from the government. We've got jobs including the production of offshore wind farms, hydrogen, and thanks to the work of the Conservatives, Ben Houchin has secured investment for hydrogen where Teesside produces 50% of the UK's hydrogen. These are great, and I do think these renewable energies are the way forward. But if we're going to set targets like reaching net zero, we'll have to make them fair on the public, and they do come with practicality issues and scientific issues. I think it's vital that we get the science right and we ensure that it's fair on the public. So hydrogen is a great important substance. I think the potency of hydrogen is 3 times that of petrol, but it's also highly flammable and different to transport. And a heat pump, you might have seen them in the press recently. They're a great and an innovative way to heat a home, but they're also a massive cost to the consumer. They can cost £20,000. And I think what the party need to realise is that people can't necessarily afford that. And I worry with the whole net zero issue, we're going to lose the public if we have these targets and they're not necessarily fair. I think with that comes great opportunity, and I think the government should focus on investing and researching into technologies and renewable energies, which are going to help the party reach the target of net zero. I think it's important now that we take this opportunity to engage young people in STEM subjects, and they are highly versatile jobs that can benefit the economy in so many ways. And I would love to see the party take on this opportunity, which will benefit the economy, and if we do go forward with trying to reach net zero, make sure the technology is right, and we don't end up with a situation like what happened with diesel, where the government start encouraging everyone to get diesel cars, which then turns out they're not great and they're not practical for everyday use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next we have Luke.
So where is the Conservative Party today? Very simply, it is in the thrall, it is in the mix, it is suffering from the symptoms of a unilateral embrace of liberalism. We saw after Mrs Thatcher and after we lost to Labour so terribly because of the issues not of Brexit but so much of Europe and split within the Conservative Party, compassionate conservatism, where we embraced liberalism and where we shifted economically and socially to the left. And we're dominated by liberalism. Now, some people have no issue with liberalism, but as a conservative, I do. But also, it's not just liberalism, it's also individuals who lack conviction. And one of the issues we saw in 2019, get Brexit done. 3 words that assured us to get a 80-seat majority. That is no ideas. So one of the issues that the party needs to address is re-engagement with ideas. There is, of course, in politics, a dimension and a tension between pragmatism and ideology. Now, I would say that we need to re-engage with ideology because we have individuals, whether they are staffers, whether they're in CCHQ, should it be scrapped, yes or no? Would that change the dynamic of the party if it was from re-engaging with local people, with individuals, with communities, building them back up again? Very important questions that the party needs to address, and one I would champion for us to begin with. But we need to address that there are individuals in our party who have no conviction, who have nothing to stand up for, they have nothing to disagree with you. Why is that? Because they're intellectually incapable of disagreeing with somebody else, because they're offended. Cancel culture, the metropolitan sense of, I'm a liberal, you've said something, I've said something, but you must say what I believe, and that there is no room for the broad church because there is a domination of ideology, which, as I mentioned before, is liberalism. And that's a very important question, a very important issue that needs to be addressed. Where is the party going? I mean, we have to think about, we've just come out of the pandemic, and of course no one might have expected that to have happened, where we have, I'm a liberal Boris Johnson who's championing liberalism, but you know, once you lose your liberty, very, very difficult to get it back. How are we going to navigate our liberty after COVID? Now, that's a question I wouldn't have asked 12 months ago or two years ago. In terms of the economy, in terms of us as economic conservatives, where do we see the future? The autumn statement, I say in October, will be a very interesting point for how much money do we begin to pay back and how do we do so? It'll be very interesting to see when furlough ends, what is our role in Europe, what is our role in the world after Brexit? These are important questions that we need to ask. But yet again, we do not have ideas. So where do I see the party going? To re-engage with ideas, that the idea of the family, the ideas that institutions in which we have are important, begin with something very, very small and cultivate. As Scruton says, it's difficult to build something new. It's difficult to build anew and to start again fresh. That's very difficult. So I think it's better that we start with the simple things that we know that we've done well and build forward.
Next, Maya.
Right, as most of you can tell, I'm neither on the orthodox traditional side or the progressive big government kind of paternalistic side of conservatism. The problem that we have is the party right now, we think that we are debating on this battle of ideas, but generally speaking, the reason the party has been struggling is because the battle is tribalist. It's all about the different tribes that, you know, oh, you're wet, you're dry. It's not necessarily on the actual ideas. People think that they're actually debating the ideas and the values, whether, you know, again, like a Theresa Mayite, paternalistic, progressive side, or more of a Thatcherite side. It's actually, essentially both sides are attacking each other, saying, well, you're not one of us, or you're one of us. That's why the Tory party has just been struggling. Right now, we can all agree, the Tory party and the government are a wet blanket. They don't really know what they're actually doing. They don't know how right-wing they should be and how left-wing they should be. So they create this pick-and-mix thing, which is essentially just big government, without them even wanting to be big government, because they know that they can rely on ordinary people who tend to be closer to security over liberty, unless security goes too far, then people then want their liberty back. So right now, we're still going towards the security level of society. So of course, if you come out, offer them free money or investment, because it's all the same thing, people just change the words, it's still handouts. Even if you call it aid or investment or infrastructure, it's all handouts. When you have both sides somehow both advocating for essentially government involvement into your life, that's the problem that we have. It's not really, and it's not these sides, I'm talking about the actual inside the party. So you got the actual, the dries and wets. So unless you could embrace what ordinary people really want out there, which is cultural conservatism. People want basic values in Britain, family values, your flag and border and the Queen. They don't have to be completely hardcore monarchists, but then they still believe in the concept. And socially speaking, people want basic support. So the safety net, you can compromise that, it can still exist. You don't have to go completely anarcho-libertarian. We can still compromise. But in reality, people just want the government to get out of their lives. So economically, no one is brave enough to embrace free market capitalism. And that's the problem that we have. And there's no party that can actually do this right now. You would think that the Tory party is still the biggest platform that can do it. The Lib Dems probably had the chance when they were created after the Liberal Party, especially in the 90s. They could have been that party if they'd embraced cultural conservatism, not social conservatism, cultural conservatism, basic values of all the things that obviously you guys obviously will always say. At the same time, let people be. Don't get involved with their lives. The government should just be there to make sure that no one is harming anybody else. That's all. Internal security and, of course, defense. And the rest of it is just justice system. Make sure that no one's harming anybody else.
Thank you. Some great speeches so far, and I'm sure this will be another one, Alice.
Well, the way I see it at the moment is that the Conservative Party is so out of touch with the actual voters. I mean, Brexit was such a firm rejection of globalist politics, and yet we've left the EU only to find ourselves answerable to other supranational institutions who are unaccountable and who aren't elected. I'm thinking about the WHO, the UN, the WEF. I mean, the fact that Matt Hancock is going on Zoom calls with other people as part of Davos and not actually listening to what the people are saying and to the working class of this country and who are firmly conservative. And I think as a nation, we obviously have so much to be proud of, and we have such an incredible heritage and culture. And why aren't we trying to be, again, building up our prestige on the world stage and being a light to other nations instead of being subservient to globalists and to that agenda? I also think that nothing is being done about the monolithic leftist infiltration of almost all British institutions. The reason why our generation is so completely radicalised into the leftist mindset is purely because there is so much indoctrination in schools and in universities, and nothing is being done to combat this. Nothing is being done to teach about the truth of our history and of our culture, which is, I think, would be very inspiring and actually empower young people to rally behind our nation with pride and patriotism. That is what I would like to see in the future.
And once again, last but not least, Samuel.
Well, like so many things in this world, the root of the problem of the Conservative Party is indifference. I mean, it's not so much a case that they don't know what they stand for, they don't care. The party that preached take back control cannot control the borders. The party that promises freedom does nothing but feed the galumphing bureaucratic leviathan that we call the state. We also have a scenario where conservatism has basically been used interchangeably with moderation, and thus it has allowed the Conservative Party to do two things that it loves more than anything else: decline and management. They are managerialists, they are declinists, and they believed in managed decline. The only way that this party, and indeed the wider conservative movement, can actually face the problems and the challenges of tomorrow and today is by following through on its own logic. If moderation is the key to all of life, then perhaps moderation should moderate itself once in a while. Instead, what we require is not gathering around this little centre ground that doesn't exist, engaging in this battle of ideas that no one can even define the terms of. What we should instead do is embrace a new form of radicalism, a new form of conservatism that isn't just afraid to speak its own name, but is actually willing to knock over everything in its path should it stand as a threat to the Britain that we love.
Remind everybody when we get into this next part to speak up, take a book out of my leaf maybe, I just raised the volume a little bit. Wait, sorry, I didn't really know that. So yeah, just speak up a little.
Yes, so now we're going to go do some pushbacks from the panellists to each other panellists. Let's get a little bit feisty, get a bit of bite in there. Is anyone who wants to kick it off? Because if not, I do have points for every single panellist here.
Go on, Jake.
Jake's keen to go.
You have 1 minute. You have 1 minute.
Is it to any person individual or is it as a collective?
No, not necessarily. I want to make the point that it's perfectly fine to say that the government needs to do things to level up the country, but the issue with any form of government-directed intervention in the economy is the next government might repeal it. So you essentially are building your own scaffold. The problem, however, is not big state or small state. The problem is democracy. The fact of the matter is democracy works on a 5-year logic. All it thinks, when you had David Cameron saying our long-term economic plan, he meant so we can win the next election. It was nothing to do with actually enriching the nation of Britain. Now, democracy is perfectly fine in moderation, but when we have this hyper-democracy or wherever there's an issue of what do people want, what do people do, well, let's let them own decide by giving them another devolved institution. In the end, we're going to have devolved institutions at the head of every road. The problem is democracy as a logic. It carries itself to its own destruction.
Could I invite Maya to actually fight back on that, because I know your whole speech is based about rolling back the government, rolling back the state.
Well, technically I should disagree, but I agree because there is a tiny bit disagreement. Generally speaking, in any other country, including the US, the devolved powers as a concept or decentralization works. But this country is so small, not necessarily just because of the size, population is big, but the way geographically, the way it's set, that if you have one small centralized system, it works. You don't need to have devolved powers. You don't need regional powers in Scotland or Wales and things like that. The problem is that you're absolutely right that the problem that we have is the whole system, the way parties and politicians and governments work based on short-termism. And I wanted to kind of mention to those who are more progressive and more obviously pro-big government, if anyone wants to answer this, that where's the line? We could invest. We could try to level up. We could do Northern Powerhouse and Scottish Powerhouse and Lewisham Powerhouse. Where is the line? Are we going to keep going and going, or do we have a line from the left of the Tory party? I just want to know where the line is.
Someone slightly more progressive.
I think you're absolutely right. I must, not really.
Are we all going to disagree at some point? Or
my colleague has made such a wonderful point. No, I think definitely on the notion of the idea that there perhaps is too much devolution and continue going more devolved, it doesn't make much sense, because as the referendum showed us, the party is now transfixed not with leading but with following, and that makes for wonderful representation of democracy but crap leadership, because we now have no vision because it's all polling. What does the red wall think? Ignoring the fact the red wall as a person doesn't exist, and it's just, if you don't like it, well, someone in the red wall does. The whole party has come down to spin doctors and polling, and what does Ipsos Mori think, and what's the red wall doing? And so bringing more government into that and bringing more, devolving it down, as I like government, I do, can't hide it, bit paternalist, sorry. But there comes a point where it should be centralised. The state should exist largely when you need it.
Right, thank you. I'm going to have to cut you off there. Sorry, I'm very strict. And I know that Alice wanted to say something.
Yes, well, I actually don't believe that centralisation is the way to solve the issues that we're seeing at the moment. In fact, I'd say decentralisation should be the key thing. Over the recent, I think, couple of months, we've seen the effect of a state which has been totally centralised, which has resulted in authoritarian policies, pretty much tyrannical government, and from what I can see. And devolution really has nothing to do with that. Devolution just creates more bureaucracy, and obviously I stand firmly against that. But I think things must be decentralised in order to give a voice to people who, at the moment, are voiceless in our parliament, and not just because of MPs lacking the spine to stand up for what ordinary people think in the face of, I know, Conservative Party and a lot of funding and a lot of globalist, agenda there. But I would say that I think we do need to localise more, and that's the only way in which people will be heard from the working class, families who've lost jobs over the last year, whose businesses have collapsed. These are the people who need to be heard right now, and they're not being heard.
Luke, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, more so wanted to respond to what Katie said, saying that we've won 4 elections, we're going to win another. In this country, we're not communist China, there is no one-party state. We do not have a divine right to rule. Some might want to try and say that we do. If we win the next election, by God, in some ways I hope that we don't, because we need to be out of government for us to re-engage in ideas. Because if we hemorrhage to being in government again, as I said before, with no ideas, get Brexit done, 3 words, Build Back Better, all of this kind of, that you can say in 30 seconds on Radio 4. So it's actually returning to people saying, okay, let's be in government. Red Wall, fine. I would say culture conservatives, as Maya said, and that British people are a conservative people. And there is nobody making that case to them. Nobody is saying, okay, you don't vote Tory because you don't like Mrs. Thatcher, what happened? You lost your job. But no one's making the case to them post-Brexit of saying cultural and social conservative. It doesn't mean a hard face dragging us back to the 1950s. It is actually saying, here is a way to behave, here is a way to conserve what we have, here is a way to be responsible Britons in society. No one is making that case, and we're not going to in the next election unless we engage with those ideas. No one is prepared to do that at the moment, and we need to start doing it.
So Katie, obviously that point was slightly directed at you. Do you think the answer is for us to lose the next election? Do you think that will fix the problems?
I mean, if you want to lose the next election, go ahead, but I don't. No party has really ever won that many seats back of an election. It's just based on statistics. Realistically, it's not going to happen, however much you might want it to. The only possible option could be a Labour and SNP coalition. Would you rather that? Would you rather the country break up?
If it meant we could re-engage with our ideas, if it meant actually that as Conservatives we can stand for something and have some grit, then yes. Because what does it mean to be a Conservative? Because there is the great debate between libertarianism and more paternalist ideology. Yes, that's fine.
But what you're saying is the only way we can learn how to find that is by losing an election.
It happened to do Labour. Where did New Labour come from? Being out of power. New Labour decided that they had to change themselves. And the Tories had to do so as well. The Tories did so after 97 with compassionate conservatism. So I would say, no, let's get a bit more hard right conservatism.
So would you not say that's just such a pessimistic view of the Conservative Party in the sense that we can't do it unless we get a bloody big kick up the arse?
I think we haven't done it at the moment. We won 80 seats. What have we got to
So
say?
would you be happy to vote against the Conservative Party at the next election?
That's a very interesting question.
Please answer it.
I think I would.
Yeah.
If it meant that
No, that is absolutely right. Just to add to this, the issue is, as you said, they can't really define conservatism. The people in this country are, as I said, generally speaking, culturally conservative. The reason they can't vote Tory is because of Tory as a brand, but they should be voting conservative because they are culturally, socially based on a basic level conservative, but they're old English liberals. They still resist authority and big government. These are the people who created, the concept of free trade and free market. We're not like mainland Europe, so we don't want big government in that sense. So we just have to resell the whole idea to ordinary people out there, so that we say you're voting blue, not for the Tory party, but you're voting because these are your values.
Make the case to them.
And we can't do it unless we go down. And as a libertarian, and as Joker said once, you have to bring it down to rebuild it. So
Very quickly, by way of applause, who voted for the Conservative Party at the last election? Do you know what an applause is? And who would vote for the Conservative Party in a forthcoming election?
Depends.
Interesting.
I just wanted to bring Chloe in here because I know that she is from a Red Wall seat, is that correct? So I was just wondering, do you think Boris is the right person to win over the Red Wall once again? Or?
Yeah, I do, because Boris can connect with people up north that other leaders can't. And especially now, like when we say that we might think that we don't want the party to win the next election, I think there's no party, like look at the alternatives. The Labour Party are in a state, we do need to be careful what we wish for. Everyone right now, a lot of people up north are saying Starmer has no plan, he has no policy. They don't say that about Boris. And I do agree with what people say. We won the Red Wall by saying we're going to bring jobs, we're going to bring investment. And I do think there is opportunity to bring in.
What does Red Wall conservatism mean though? So we won 80 seats, we won the Red Wall, but there is no handouts. But there is no ideas, and the party as a whole doesn't have to grapple back with them.
I think everyone's just ignoring the fact that the Conservative Party are pretty much identical to the Labour Party at the moment. Can I just say, Keir Starmer is absolutely not out of place at all in the modern Conservative Party. And I do not think that Boris is the man to lead us into the next election. Definitely not.
It's all well and good, but I mean, unless like you've been to South Shields, where I'm from, where you're saying to these people, vote for us and we're going to bring you jobs. That's what we're about as Conservatives.
It's not the job of the government to give jobs.
Yeah, but what else was there up north, really? Like,
if it wins elections, is that not
Okay,
good
so
enough?
I agree with Chloe that if we could say that next election Boris could still win the certain northern working class with the red wall, we could win. But at what cost? What's the point of it? Well, we could just win in the election. But there's a cost because nothing's going to get done. We're not going to help them.
So talk about costs. How do we navigate then out of COVID and out of how much money we've spent from lockdowns? How do we? I mean, it's all good and well talking about the creation of jobs, but when, as I said, watch in October when the autumn statement comes out, money will have to be paid back. So job creation, how's that going to work? People are mass unemployed.
What the truth is, the Conservatives are supposed to be a party which should be looking out for our finances on a national level. Are they? No. Debt is spiralling out of control, and it's going to fall on our generation's shoulders to pay it back. I mean, what is Rishi Sunak doing? Just spending as if he believes in the magic money tree, just like Jeremy Corbyn. This is socialism masquerading as trying to protect the
There is a little bit of leeway with COVID. We can all accept that things have just become a little bit awry, and it's now finding our feet and asserting it in the right direction to where we're going. But Chloe, did you want to quickly add something on the finances?
not necessarily for finance. I'm not great at economics, but I think
go back to the gold standard.
Yeah.
So on jobs, do you think that
abolish the central
bank? Do you think Conservative Party is doing enough for young people to entice young people into the party? Because when we talk about things like property ownership, obviously that's kind of gone away, and that was one of the big, advantages of voting Conservative. So do you think that they're doing enough?
I think they really need to inspire young people better, and I do think the education system as it is doesn't teach young people about the actual range of jobs that they have open to them. So I would love to see the party think about education in a different way to actually engage with young people about what the options are.
Yeah, that's something I'd actually like to hear from Jake on. I think pretty much all of you actually, because this is all about forward looking. And it's actually quite refreshing. I don't think there's anyone in the 30s group in here. And whenever you see people talking about forward looking, it's always a bunch of old, middle-aged, white people. How can we engage young people? It's like, well, But Jake, you did a really passionate speech about the direction, the trajectory of where the Conservative Party's going. I suppose moving on from that, what can we actually do to engage young people and make conservatism sexy? If that's possible.
Well, in terms of attracting young people, I don't think that talking about young people is actually all that constructive, because by the next election, those young people will not be young people anymore. So, and you're absolutely right what you're saying in terms of losing the next generation of voters, but at the same time, it's almost a cast iron rule of democratic politics that people become more conservative as they grow up. But the issue lies in the fact that, as you say, we are not giving them reasons to do so. We are not giving them capacities to own their own, build businesses. We're not giving them capacities to own their own homes. In fact, I don't think I've heard this government talk about business ownership. It talks about home ownership, but nothing about business ownership. And that's remarkably different to any Conservative party since about 1860. This is a remarkable change. And as I hate to sound like a broken record, but we're going back to the issue then of, if government's the one providing it, government's the one that can take it away. But I hate to say, I would put a significant amount of money on Boris Johnson not being the leader in the next general election. He said multiple times.
Who would you like to see as leader?
I'd like that not to matter. I'd like it to not be the case that every time we have an election we talk about the end of this country. That seems to be a major problem in democracy that people don't seem to want to talk about. I don't want to, again, disparage democracy too much, but if every single time there's an election someone goes, this is the end of Britain, really, does that mean that democracy is a good thing in that circumstance? But Boris Johnson's not going to be leader because he's got too much alimony to pay.
No,
right. Being the party of small businesses. Yeah, right.
I just think what you were saying in terms of how we engage young people, what the party has done, I mean, how many people joined the Tory party under Theresa May? Because she represented kind of soft and cuddly conservatism that doesn't really say anything, isn't too scary, isn't too like Mrs Thatcher, isn't too kind of non-liberal. So what the party has isn't too radical, absolutely. And the party, instead of doing that, instead of kind of being with, as I mentioned earlier, no conviction, and actually it doesn't matter because I'm a spineless kind of creature who just kind of, climbs the greasy pole. How many people leave university, they're involved in their uni society, they campaign, all they are, glorified campaigner, they're now staff. I mean, that reality, whether you like it or not, does happen. And that is not the way to move forward. Yeah. And you have to, this re-engagement with ideas, ideology and conviction. Because when people have conviction, they want to fight for it, they want to be involved. That is, in answer to that question on engaging young people, give them something to believe in.
Right. Should that come from government?
Yeah.
Because that's the problem. If we're giving them, again, just this one single source, the next government might change that. The next government might be Labour, and then there won't be anything for young people.
But you're both right in the sense that we are too obsessed, well, politicos. A lot of people talk about the party and the politicians, their names. Who do you prefer? Which one? What's the solution? Stop following the figures, follow the ideas. And the reason I say that is because actually, in fact, the left of the party, who've been dominating the party forever, and the progressive big government authoritarian paternalistic side, they're already winning anyway, and they might still win the next election because now, especially because of lockdown and COVID, we created this culture and mentality across the country of pro-security. So a lot of people will still be voting Boris, and the Tories will still win anyway. But is that good? And that's why we need a bit of bring down this system a little bit, not in an anarchist level, but you need to kind of wake up this mentality that you don't need big government, you don't need that father figure or mother figure.
Thank you for that one, sorry. I hate feeling rude, but got to stick to time. I just had, I think we can all kind of agree about young people and whether the Conservatives are doing enough, but on a slightly different issue that I wanted to come to Shorsha for, I know you spoke about the monarchy. I guess my question is, can you be a Conservative and a Republican?
Well, there are certainly people that do it. I wouldn't say they were right. In the same way I said, but we're a conservative and unionist party, but yet we have people that would very happily jettison Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland to the sea if they could press the button to do it. I think the problem is that, as I said, Britain has, in all of the last however many centuries that it has existed as an entity, Britain has stood out for its culture. Our monarchy, that despite the rest of Europe throwing theirs away, we have stuck onto and still hold, most of us, as icons. The House of Lords, the institution, the judiciary, Parliament, for God's sakes. It all boils down to what it is to be British. And the idea, what really comes to me is the fact that we didn't question the necessity of the monarchy or the House of Lords or any of that, because it was accepted that as a British person, as someone who identifies being British, that was beyond it. That was what you were signing up for. And now we are questioning it. It's because people do not love their country anymore, for a plethora of reasons. And the fact that they do not love their country makes these questions that we now have to entertain. And so I think, unfortunately, it does sadly bring Republicans into our midst. But it's our job to get to a position where that doesn't have to be a question.
Yeah. So, if we're not keeping you.
Checking the live stream.
Is there anything you just want to...
Watching it live.
What do I look like? No.
I mean, just going back to something that was said at the beginning, and I think that, like how a mighty oak with all its branches grows from a single acorn, this debate has really got it wrong from the get-go. It assumes that the parties, and Alice touched on this briefly, that it will matter what parties will offer. Because let's face it, the Conservative Party will be the Labour Party in 5 years' time. You go door to door and people say, oh, I don't like Labour, and you're like, well, tough, because we're going to be them in 5 years. People seem to assume that the parties are distinct, but not only that there is no ideological underpinning uniting them. They act as if that they are operating in complete isolation from Blair's law a day. They're operating as if they are in control of government.
Okay, but how do we rectify that?
There is one solution. There is one solution, but it is two solutions. People seem to think. I mean,
Because
politics
this isn't a conversation about what's happening today. It's how do we
politics
change
is
moving
first
forward?
and last, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that a fair assumption?
But many people are not prepared to defend. So they say the Tory party is broken. They say what the issues are.
But how
they
can we
say,
change it?
Well, we'll change it. Well, firstly, there has to be some en masse political reassignment to where people who do not belong within the party,
What
whether
about
they
new
belong.
party?
As I said, Scruton says it's difficult to create something new.
What
And
about
it's difficult
Reclaim Party,
to create
Lawrence
Reclaim Party, SDP, whatever. They won't win elections. Politics is as much about winning elections as it is ideology.
Yeah.
And the SDP, it's not going to happen. I wish, in some ways, I wish it would, but it's not. But I wanted to return back to what we're saying about the monarchy.
Very quickly.
Because the monarchy is the
30
last
seconds.
last important institution that we have. When the Queen dies and when Charles goes, Republicans will come out of nowhere, and that will change the fabric of Britain. I've told you here first. We need to find a solution to that, because when the Republicans come, they're going to come for our heads like they did in France.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think things got a bit fiery in the end. Some really good points from everyone. And don't worry, if there's still things you wanted to say, you'll have the opportunity when we come to our audience questions.
Yeah, so I hope you do have plenty of questions to ask. I hope they're somewhat spicy and are going to invigorate the conversation. So don't forget to go to either Joseph or Olivia with any questions you have. Live chat. Hello. Please write them in the chat and we'll come to them shortly.
And join us again in 20 minutes.
Ad
Don't
break.
just leave.
Subscribe.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's
I want a Prosecco.
Yeah, same. I'd love to crack open a bottle. Yeah, literally. What
Was that one solution?
I was cut off. I was cut off.
Someone made a call to the train operator. Where? Is the microphone still on?
Yeah, I was going to say, watch what you say.
Yeah, turn the microphones off, crap. Turn them off. We don't want to
This is an advert for Northern Section.
Yeah.
Just in case.
I was sent prepositions.
Welcome back, everyone. It's glad to see no one has left us quite yet. It's always good to see. So now it's time to open up the floor. So how we'll do it is we'll start with one question from the live stream and then one question from the audience. So the first question, which I actually think will be really useful, is from...
Really quickly, no heckling, chaps. It's going to be a lively discussion. And if you've got anything to say, just raise your hand if it's something you need to add. When we read your name from the list of people that are here, if you just raise your hand, we'll find a microphone to come to you. Best way to do it.
Right, perfect. So the first question is from Joz the Great and Powerful. So hello, Joz. He asks, can the panel define social conservatism? So should we start with Jake?
It's a good question. Social conservatism, distinct from, say, economic conservatism, is, I suppose, the conservatism that is concerned with society. After all, we live in a society, and we've got to make sure that that society is at least conserved. I think a lot of the time people think that social conservatism is a specific ideological program, whereas actually it's more of an attitude towards change and towards how things progress. So realistically, you could have conservatives or social conservatives who conserve the society of fairly left-wing socialist project, as you had in the 1950s and 60s in USSR, as well as Great Britain. So social conservatism is an attitude to change, I think, but my definition is not always authoritative.
Would anyone agree or disagree?
Yeah, I would expand. So I agree, but
I'll expand on expansion after.
You're like Keir Starmer sitting on the bench.
Well, I don't think I am. Something's going wrong if I am. Social conservatism is really say, I go with the Scrutonian view that we have inherited something good and I want to keep hold of it. And it's saying that as a culture we have good things that we want to pass on to our generation. It's not something that is harshly judgmental. It's not something that wants to drag people back to an idealised time in the past, but it is something about belonging. I belong as a British national, I belong with a culture, with a heritage, and I want to keep hold of those things. And also, that doesn't mean that I'm adverse to change, I'm adverse to progress, but it's at a human pace, and it's doing, we must change to conserve, but we're not doing so for the sake of its own sake. And social conservatism is really saying that we want to be inclusive, patriotic, that we want to take society at a steady pace and keep hold of the good things that we've got, because they deserve to protect it, to have something to hand on in the future.
Yeah, and to add to that, because that's good fundamental definition, social conservatism or conservatism is not an ideology. It's a set of values, and it really depends on where you are, what culture you're in. So, for example, social conservatism in Afghanistan and Saudi is very different to in the West. Also, social conservatism in this country and even in the US, very different to mainland Europe. So, for example, here, conservatism conserves the values of old English liberalism, classical liberalism, the ideas that obviously since the post-medieval times created it, and as you said, these are the good values, so we are trying to conserve it. We are not really against change, but in reality, don't just change something if it's not really broken, and don't just fix something if it's not broken.
Yeah. And even if you say that ideologies are flexible, let's do try and keep it towards UK conservatism, because that is ultimately the topic of debate here. Question from the audience, Chris Winter.
Yeah, all right.
Right, just wait for your mic.
He's waiting. You have something in regards to Republican and Liberal style.
Yeah. Oh.
There he is.
They're making me even louder. So my question is, obviously at the moment, the Tory party seems to be appealing to like a few groups of people, namely poorer people from the north of England in the Red Wall, the sort of metro libs who operate in cities in some parts of London, the very wealthy people, and then the sort of reclusive, spooky aristocracy who operate in their own little worlds. How long will it be until the Tory party splits into a party, two parties, one of which is for the poorer northern people and the aristocracy, and a more liberal metropolitan party, so sort of like a Republican party for the poorer, obviously not Republican, but like American Republican, a more Republican party for the poor and aristocracy, and a more sort of right Democrat party for the Mets and Libs and Wets who seem to dominate the party.
Is there anyone here that you would particularly like to hear from?
No.
It's not therapy.
Anyone in particular?
We'll all go home.
Anyone will be fine. Don't care. Cheers.
Anyone would like to comment on that? Yeah.
So I mentioned earlier that this should be this political reassignment, so that people who are not conservative, I mean, the Conservative Party is for conservatives, the Liberal Party is for liberals. So that metropolitan liberal, whether you're from Labour, whether you're from the Conservatives, wherever you're from, all group together and all talk in an echo chamber, and leave the rest of us to get on with conserving and doing what we think is important. So that split, I hope, happens before the next election. Would be lovely if it did happen. But the sooner the better that happens, because metropolitan liberalism is not conservatism, first of all, is the first thing that I say, as I've mentioned all the way through. But you can't try and have your cake and eat it. You can't try and say, well, I'm middle class and I want to, poor working people, I want to be for them, when your values, and when you're not listening to what they're saying, because that is an element of elitism, when you say you're going to believe this. That kind of thing has no place in a conservatism that I believe in and that my organisation believes in. And so that split which you're talking about, if it can happen as soon as possible, I mean, I can ferry you out if you want. I can, ship you off if you would like,
right,
because it allows people. Well, but it's allowing people quite seriously to ideologically realign and to do that within the party, and so people can be in their neat little box where they belong. I don't mean that in a identitarian way, but it's allowing people to be in the right space.
Yeah, fantastic. Jake, really quickly.
The Conservative Party will not split as long as the Labour Party exists. Yes. It's one of the cast iron rules of British politics that the right is united by what it's against.
A little bit louder, Jake, sorry.
Sorry. The right is united by what it's against. And the rise of the Labour Party in the 1920s saw a mass exodus of Liberals from the Liberal Party to the Conservative Party, to the extent in the 1940s most Conservative associations changed their name to the Conservative and Liberal Association of Hartlepool or wherever. So no, it won't happen as long as Labour exists as a party.
Right, and on to our next question, which is from the live stream. It's from someone that calls himself Alshir Tory. They ask, why are we obsessed with green politics? And they add, we aren't the Green Party. I argue part of conservatism is conserving the world we live in, but anyway, I just wanted to come to Casey on this one, because I have seen you tweet about climate change before, and I know it's something you're passionate about.
I think what you said is right. If we are conservatives and we want to conserve things, then why is the environment not part of that? Why are so many conservatives against climate change? Why do they not believe in it? Surely if you want to preserve your way of life, that doesn't just include values, it doesn't include how you live your life. It includes the planet, it includes the earth. You need to take action and conserve the planet as well, not just what you agree with.
So does anyone disagree?
Yeah.
Alice? Well, I'd say the issue mainly with the Green politics and the Conservative Party is the policies that they're proposing in order to allegedly stop climate change. And these will really end up impoverishing the most vulnerable people in society already. For example, the push to make all these mostly elderly people install smart boilers, which are already ridiculously expensive and just unnecessary. These kind of pushes and these policies, they seem to have an ulterior motive, which is ultimately a corporatist one, and it's not actually about conserving the environment, because there are many ways we can do that, and we should have that debate and that discussion and not let it be dominated by big corporations who have their own agendas, and especially with the smart meters and the smart boilers.
Just to add to that,
suspicious about them. I'll just say
I think one of the problems that many conservatives have, i.e. party or not, with eco-politics, is rather like a watermelon, where it's green on the outside but red in the middle. And when you look at, and the same way with Black Lives Matter and all these other corporations, that when you look at their policies, okay, conserve the countryside. Yes, I very much enjoy the countryside, and I want to. HS2 is doing terrible things for local country and everything else, but it is the red core. And so actually, when you strip the exterior, and when you look at the interior, it is red politics all the way through, not for me.
Yeah, and I would quickly say that there is a difference between being pro-environment and pro-climate change agenda.
And
Agenda being the
that's
point,
and
agenda
how you
being-
do it, and what you think is going to happen. Is it 8 months that we're going to do it, or 2 years? And how are you going to do it? Everybody's basically essentially pro-environment, even without realizing.
Yeah.
Capitalism is pro-environment because it actually you create new ideas, new scientific technologies, because it's actually profitable. When you don't try to impose it onto people, businesses and individuals are already becoming green by creating all these new things because they're a lot easier and cheaper. But the more you shove it down their throat, the more you're going to create communism.
Does anyone on the panel support the net zero, the government's net zero agenda?
On paper, I do, but I don't think it's
It's viable. No.
Yeah, I think
Pipe dream.
Yeah,
I think actually on Maya's point, he made a really good point about
Oh.
innovative technology, because
Feed the
actually
ego.
that is technology being created, especially to do with coal and carbon capture, for example, which is no one's talking about it because it doesn't suit the idea that we must siphon coal out of our industries completely. Whilst on the other hand, China are making the most use of coal, but the point is that these policies clearly come from a socialist ideology, and that is the biggest problem with them, that they're not truly about conserving the climate, about creating jobs, not at all, but actually increasing surveillance and increasing communist control, I suppose.
Anti-capitalist, really.
Yeah.
I agree that the policies aren't necessarily the right ones in the details, but how do we even draw up these policies if some of the party can't even acknowledge that climate change is real? So how do we get there to begin with if we've got people who won't say?
The only
Do we have any
policy-
climate change skeptics on the panel?
Well, climate change agenda is here.
Oh, really?
Any
do you
climate
wanna
change
expand?
deniers?
Well, I think that's where the problem is.
It depends what you mean by
the
denier.
pro-climate change agenda people should stop calling everyone who's skeptical towards the agenda climate
Denier.
deniers.
Also, but
Because
I
it's still
didn't do
pro-environment.
that.
No,
reflects- that
besides
reflects-
that side.
About shutting down the
Okay, hang on.
What that reflects is a wider problem, and again, I hate to sound like a scratch record, but a wider liberal problem of not being able to work with dissent. So there is an orthodoxy, liberal or not, and people are unable to disagree and unable to engage in ideas. So it all returns back to the original point in which I meant. Well, you may call them facts, but I should be able to disagree with
the
them.
scientist who gives the facts and knows what they're doing over someone who doesn't.
But
Government's been
anybody-
led by
That's the
scientists
problem,
for the
there are
last
many
18 months
Yeah,
to
scientists
and
well.
also and
So
there is dissent
can't
within
say
science. There is academic, but you have to accept that there is academic. There is academic.
Okay, just very quickly, because it quite nicely links into Chris Winter's second point. Shall I just read it for you?
No,
Do you
I
mind?
want to say it.
All right, go on then. It's about China and nuclear.
Kristen, 2 questions, please. I'm a STEMie, I like STEM, I do engineering, very cool. Yes, nuclear power, wow, pretty epic. Why are we having the Chinese build our nuclear power stations? We want this investment and we are levelling up in other areas, but then we're hiring communist countries to go build it for us, which is kind of cringe. And it's well, where is the actual investment in UK tech companies and UK energy companies? It's just not there.
I think fundamentally, because there's a lack of vision in this country, there's a lack of interest, and there is the fact that they said you will go to build a nuclear power plant. There will be the NIMBYs first and foremost that will sit and complain, no, I don't want to live in the shadow of nuclear, and then the lawyers get involved and the price of the land goes up, and then they have to find a company that's going to do a proper job. I mean, new builds in this country are a disaster. Could you imagine a new built nuclear power plant? I don't know if I could.
Well, we once used to be a nation that was able to actually manufacture quite a lot. We had incredible industries which have over the years been decimated, particularly by pushes from the socialist left to dismantle these things, and also a mixture of supranational organisations like the EU.
I don't think you can just let the socialist left be the answer to the problem of why we don't produce anything. We don't produce anything because of a massive lack of investment in those things by the Thatcher government. When they deregulated and got rid of the coal mines, they didn't produce any alternative. Now, getting rid of the coal mines was the right move, not because of some agenda for climate change, but because it was the right thing for the country at the right time. But it's not a new idea to say that the Conservative governments in that era did nothing to present an alternative. But the other problem is no government has since. No government has offered an alternative since. We haven't actually. I know I said that local government investment in things is dangerous, but one thing that we should be investing in is the capacity to build, not necessarily building itself, but dockyards. Why do we not have actual working dockyards in this country anymore? We're an island nation. That makes no sense.
That's the point. You're confused about it. And actually the answer's right here.
Roll back.
An interesting point that Jake rightly made, and why a lot of people don't vote Conservatives, because Mrs Thatcher closed the mines, and you rightly say that there was no employment, there was nothing, and communities were decimated in that way, and that's why a communitarian approach, and saying that I know Nisa Nandi kind of makes that point about communities, but actually when you have strong families, when you have communities that work in a localised environment, that is a dimension that is not considered by those who see Thatcher economics as the be-all and end-all of conservatism. And again, it relates back to that question of what does it mean to be a conservative? Yes, the market, and there's reasons why those mines closed, but as Jake rightly said, there was no alternative to them, and that has seismic and long-reaching and far-reaching implications that has to be addressed.
Fantastic. And just one last comment, I think, from Chloe. I know, because obviously you spoke a lot about the progression in terms of climate change and where we should be going in terms of fuel.
Yeah, so I think it's completely right what Chris says, that it is awful that we're nuclear power, it's produced in China, and electric cars as well. The government had a agenda to move towards electric cars, and there was going to be the ban of petrol and diesel by a certain year, and for so long, and I think there still are, made abroad. But recently we have seen investment by Nissan, which is opening the Gigafactory in Sunderland to invest in electric car technology here, and I think it's a good step forward, and I would like to see more of that.
And now we're going to move on to something completely unrelated, and it's from Alexander Brahman. Sorry if I'm not saying the names right, but Alexander. He asked, what are the biggest LGBT issues in the UK right now, and what should the government do about it, if any? So would anyone like to start with that one?
Nope.
No? No one's going to be brave. Guys, free speech.
What's
the agenda? What
are the biggest LGBT issues? Okay, so let's talk about. Did you just say it's the resident?
No, I have to speak for the party's inexplicably stocked full of us, and apparently we've only got so few of us on the panel. So,
Okay.
Doing my part for representation. I think there is a very big issue at the moment. Working around to diversity and inclusion, I think there's a very big issue in the country with things like conversion therapy. We're 2 years on and the government said they'll ban it, and whether or not they should be banning it is an entirely different debate. But the fact that the government has said it will, and 2 years on, still going, another consultation. I said, you've got the stymie that is trans rights, and trying to find where is the right point in that to say, there are some very good points on both sides, and we need to try and find what is reasonable. And I think the government is refusing to engage, except where it can make culture wars arguments about it, because it knows, the man in the red wall loves that, ignoring again the fact that the man in the red wall does not exist. So it is this continuing idea. I think the government invents a lot of these problems by going, they're going to make all of the kids trans in the schools, despite that not necessarily being our policy at the moment, unless the gays have voted on that. What are we conserving if not the opportunity to make the kids trans in the future? But I think that's the thing. I think the government is too keen on focusing on tiny little things like drag queens in every school, when there are very issues like conversion therapy, the fact that LGBT asylum seekers come to this country and told, well, can you prove it, and stuff like that. But
I just want to quickly say, if anyone in the audience does want anything to say, please just raise your hand. We can find a way of coming back to you.
I just think, just in answer to that question, the government or the party and politics and our culture is obsessed with identity. Why does it matter that you are LGBT, that you're black? Why do you have to make a point out of making it? Because when we look at in terms of civil rights, 2010 the Equality Act under the Conservatives, gay marriage in 2014 under the Conservatives. So the idea that that there are groups of people who are en masse being pushed off of the roofs because of their sexuality, because of their gender, is a fallacy. And people like to make a case of identity because they know that divides people. This is divisive politics. And therefore, in answer to that the issue, it is a non-issue.
Right, and we're going to an audience member now, Liv, to come in.
Is this word? Oh God, it is not. Sorry, guys. Okay, so just touching on the point that George made about practical issues and like relating to conversion therapy. So I'm sure, like everybody in this room, I never received any form of LGBT sex education at all. And whilst I know the government said they'll input this, how do you think we should practically, as a society and through education, input that education so that LGBT people are safely having sex? Because that is quite a practical problem, but I think a lot of people kind of skirt around the issue.
Well, that's the thing. The problem I have is that the issues,
guys.
LGBT issues, that was all vague question around it. Just like any other social issues, should be dealt with on a societal level. And the only way you get the government involved, which we did in the past, which was needed, is something is criminalised, you decriminalise it and just allow people to do whatever they want. I don't care what you want to be, who you want to be, how you want to live your life. As long as there's no actual legislation against it, that's when I get the state involved. Otherwise, the debates, solutions, problems should be dealt with on a societal level. Parents, if they want to obviously teach their kids about obviously LGBT sex, or on local areas, communities, whatever they want to do, it's up to them. Government should not ban it, or government should not do anything, or vice versa. It just don't get the government involved in this. And it's all identity politics. We create brands, umbrellas, put people into boxes, and then we say, well, that's what you are now. But people have issues. People have issues on regular, on a daily basis, mental health issues and everything else.
Okay.
But
the question was, is that how can it be taught in a very safe, practical way?
The government
or should
not,
it, maybe?
The government, it is not the role of government to tell people how to have safe sex. Not the role of government.
Well, same way that government should not be in education in general. Government should not be in general.
If we say that parents are the first educators of their children, which they are, it is not the role of government. Okay, you can say what you're doing is legal or not, because it's a matter of legality. It's not the role of government, because where does it stop?
But what if parents don't take up that role and they're not teaching them?
But how do you jump from the state? How do you jump from the state? That is an encroachment on that's an encroachment of the state.
You end yourself in a whole different argument there, Jake.
So I think it's quite not prescient. I think it's quite fitting that we're in Birmingham and having something of this discussion, because it wasn't far from here that there was a huge protest by, it has to be said, mostly Orthodox Muslim parents against LGBT education in primary schools. Unfortunately, I agree with you, Myra, in principle, but unfortunately, we're in a position where the government has to take a stance on this, because if it doesn't, that erupts into an enormous problem. And I know that government's never the solution, but in this circumstance, government cannot just sit idly by. It has to provide some kind of answer.
Sorry, quickly, the government should intervene if there's bullying. That's basically bullying. If like in a group of people are bullying a teacher or a school not to do, that's still basically
but
going to jail. So
yes.
Deeper,
but the problem's deeper, because at some point the government is either going to have to say, yes, parents are the authority over the children's education, or they're not. That's the key issue.
Well,
it's not the actual
so what about students who are homeschooled or people who want in schools? And how do you solve that problem for children? Because if you decide if you're Christian, you decide to homeschool and you're not in the system at all, then you're taken out of.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But that's a whole problem with education in general, because obviously you've got private schools and you've got different faith schools and all this sort of thing. And I don't necessarily think that there is a clear, coherent answer. But what I'm saying is that this is a point where the government has to try and find one. I don't like that.
Jake, you mentioned something interesting, that the government needs to make a point about whether the parent is the ultimate authority in educating their children. The answer is the last hundreds and hundreds of years in this country, when actually, obviously, as a parent, it is your job to educate your child first and foremost above the state. Otherwise, that is just taking a total leaf out of the communist book. That's the number one thing targeted by communist regimes. It's education. Why? Because if you have the children, if you have the young people, you can indoctrinate them with your ideas, and that's what's happened in Soviet Russia and communist China today.
I agree.
This is a very, very dangerous game you're playing, when the state becomes the primary educator of your children.
It absolutely is.
And we do not want to become Germany or France, where homeschooling is initially banned. Because
okay, that's enough of that. Okay, I'm sure we all agree it's a bit of a slippery slope, and it's definitely a contentious issue.
Yes, so Andrew Trov.
Hello.
Trov, hello.
It's me.
Sorry.
Sounds like you don't need the mic.
It's like Emily.
That's fine, don't worry, hang on. About intrinsic conservatism within the panel.
Well.
Do we to read it?
There we go. Right. I would like to ask a question touching on something that Luke said earlier. He said, that is the question for the whole panel though, so he said that he thinks British people are intrinsically conservative or naturally conservative, I would contest that and say that evidence from, well, the last decade or so suggests otherwise. We've just taken coronavirus restrictions lying down, apart from a few protests here and there, and there's no appetite from the public at all to repeal any Blairite legislation, Comms Act that Jake mentioned, the Equality Act, any of these massive sea changes in our society. There's no appetite to repeal them at all. Is anyone on the panel brave enough to admit maybe that it's over and that conservatives have lost?
No, that's part of conservatism because it goes hand in hand with the.
The question wasn't for you.
Anyone on panel?
Yeah, it will be.
Anyone on panel? Oh, you go.
People want to conserve their way of life, what they're used to. People wanted to take the vaccine. People wanted to do all these types of things. Wear a mask. All of these, lockdown for 3 weeks to get back to what they already had. So they do all of these measures. I mean, to what extent and to how far they go along with them, to do all of these different things to return to the life which they had before. We realise now we're not going to get back to the pre-COVID normal. But in that relation, particularly to the virus, people are doing all of these things to return to their life that they had before. Now, you can say that in terms of the state, and again, it depends on how you view conservatism and what it means to be a conservative. But if you recognise that you've held on to good things and you want to keep good things, to pass them on, then you may say, well, let me do something to keep myself safe so I don't harm other people. Now, whether you agree or not with what those things are, that's a different question. Yeah. But people want to return back to what they had before because they want to hold on to what they know is good and want to have for somebody else.
Casey, would you say that people are intrinsically conservative?
I don't know if I would say they're intrinsically conservative, but I'd agree on the COVID restrictions in that we have just accepted them lying down. It's the crooks that protest against it. Everybody else is just accepts it. Everybody has stayed at home for 3 lockdowns for pretty much a third for the last 18 months. And we haven't put up a fight. We haven't asked why is this necessary? Why is it needing to last now? All they've said is the cases are going up. Cases are going up now, but we're not in lockdown. We also had the vaccine in December, so why were we in lockdown for as long as we are? I don't know if they are intrinsically, but on COVID restrictions.
Well, another thing, just very quickly.
Do asking those questions make you a crook?
I'm talking about the people that don't believe in COVID and don't believe in the.
But another thing, remember what people said. It was to save the NHS, wasn't it? That was an institution.
I agree.
Remember, it was all locked down to save the NHS. NHS as the institution. If people weren't conservative, they wouldn't want to try and preserve an institution. So the NHS has become this golden calf that people want to try and adore almost and idolatrize. So that's just a different dimension.
I agree with the slogan, but again, it's the goalposts have changed. First, it was to save the NHS. Then it was to get cases down. And then it was to save the NHS again. Then it was to save lives. And then it was because we need to vaccinate everybody in the vulnerable groups. We got there. Then we needed to vaccinate more, and then we needed more. The goalposts kept changing, so and we just accepted it. We didn't want to challenge.
Samuel, you're very forthright with your viewpoints. What's your take on people being naturally conservative? Agree or disagree?
Let's put it this way. People say that, well, to be a conservative is to conserve your way of life, and I don't disagree. But what is our way of life? Our way of life is rainbow cop cars going to arrest people for mean tweets. Our way of life is the police being complicit in the concealment of rape gangs across the country. Our way of life is having a Conservative Party that attracted a Leave voter platform, and as we all know, immigration is incredibly important to the Leave voter, and yet for some reason we are still pressing ahead with global Britain nonsense and not enforcing the borders. Let's put it this way succinctly, we are in decline, and we have been for a while. Is it over? No. Politics is never over.
Lightning, Samuel has entered the chat. Okay, so did anyone else
The torch
come
of
in on
liberty
that?
is eternal.
I think we've got a question in the crowd very quickly. Okay, marvellous. Where's
In the
the
crowd?
question? Is it in response to dare be it Samuel?
Well, anyone, just go for it.
No, because I completely agree with what you said. No, it's to address COVID and like to save the NHS. Obesity has been the biggest problem facing the NHS, and COVID has highlighted that because even if like you were healthy, if you were very overweight, you ended COVID ward. Now also as well, the vaccine was never going to work because it was too fast. It doesn't stop you from spreading it. The only way to get out of this is through drugs, and there is one, it's an anti-malarial, that stops it from duplicating in your body. So if you was able to take this like an inhaler, which you are, the pandemic could be over within 3 days.
Chloe wants to come back.
So my PhD is in immunology, the immune system, and the flu vaccine, for example, which people have that every year, and it doesn't stop you getting the flu. No vaccine has ever been 100% effective. And I think the vaccine does work. We've seen that deaths have dramatically reduced and cases have dramatically reduced. Unfortunately, the vaccine's never going to stop people spreading it completely. So I don't think that's a fair comment to say that they don't work.
Just to highlight, the question was surrounding whether or not obesity is actually the main problem facing the NHS. I think the vaccine part came in secondary to that.
So does anyone want to comment on the obesity?
Well, yeah, obesity is a problem of the NHS, not society. Because if you want to do whatever you're going to do, life is up to you. But that's the problem we have, that the state now controls health, and that's why both your right wing and left wing, you have to basically protect the NHS because we're paying for it. You have to do it. And that's the problem. So the only solution is not what the state can now do to intervene more to make people thin to save the NHS. Just come out of the healthcare, copy and paste the good models that we have from Western Europe, the Northern Europe and Singapore and other places to make it less decentralized in the sense that it's no longer a religion, so that you have to be forced to be cured. You have to be forced to be healthy to live your life. Otherwise, everybody else will pay.
I think maybe bring it back to the topic of the day, which is talking about what the Conservative Party has done, maybe in terms of like obesity being like on the back burner to COVID. What maybe is your interpretation of what the Conservative Party has done in their response to COVID, and how should we now adjust the balance in making sure that other issues are not sidelined?
I had a point regarding obesity, but not necessarily. Okay, so the Conservative Party has passed a number of laws, as Maya's rightly said, that intervene in essentially our private consumption, our private behaviour. They're relatively reasonable in the sense that they're aiming a fairly reasonable goal, which is to help people live healthier lives. That's not the role of the state, but that doesn't take away the reasonability of the idea. However, things like the sugar drinks levy and the sugar tax and all these things only ever hit the poor the hardest. Okay, they're regressive taxes. In fact, and they have a kind of, especially with regards to sugar drinks levy, they kind of have like a circular problem where if you were to go into Iceland today, you could find a 3-litre bottle of Pepsi Max that has aspartame in it, much more aspartame in it, that would be much, much cheaper than a 1-litre bottle of full-fat Coke. Yep. So actually, you're incentivizing less healthy behaviour because people just, when it comes to consumption of goods, people just think about what's cheap.
Just a quick thing on consumption. Perfect example: cigarettes in this country, smoking. They thought that it was before plain packaging, increasing taxes, making it expensive. That's why it went down. In reality, in the middle classes, people who have money, actually the rate's gone down because it's not cool anymore. The working class and the poor stay the same, or it's actually going up anyway. So they're making it more expensive is not going to bring it down.
But in terms of how people behave and consumption, again, it's a behavioural thing. Actually, saying to people, well, okay, how do you cook? Do you know how to cook? Do you know how to provide for your family? And again, it all begins in the home. I'm telling people, actually, this is the right way to eat. It's not the state imposing, it's trying to enable people and enamour people to look after themselves healthily. Now, if government can encourage people to do that, then fine. But taxing people, and we're not the party of tax anyway, is the incorrect approach to take.
Right, we'll let Alice come in and then we'll move on. Well, actually, that is pretty much, and what Jake was saying as well, touched on a very important point, which is the fundamentally very corporatist attitude of the Conservative Party, in the sense they're taxing the consumer and not actually doing something about the corporation. And we see this also with plastic bags. I'm sure everyone's noticed that we're the ones getting charged for taking a plastic bag, and it's like 10 pence, which does add up over time. Whereas the actual corporation who are mass producing plastic bags, apparently they don't have to suffer any of this. I mean, this is fundamentally a very anti-conservative.
Right, and now we're going to move on just to a different question. We had two very similar questions, one from Sam Law, but the one that I'm going to read out is from Oliver Knight. He asked, very interesting debate so far from the panel. Thanks, Oliver. He then goes on to say, I would be intrigued to know what the panel thinks of the increasingly anti-British sentiment taking hold within our educational institutions. And as a university student, I can say that this is definitely a problem. But I guess as an extension to that, what could we do about it? Would anyone like to answer? Is anyone here at university right now? What's your, Chloe? What's your?
So I'm not. I don't do lectures or anything anymore, but I do mix with probably the academics more. And I walk down the corridor every day to my office, and every single notice board has strike posters on, and it's say yes to action, say yes to pensions and wages increase and everything, and it feels very pressurised. And to be honest, I'm not sure what we can do unless we get past the pressure that the university themselves, the people there, are putting on people to have the kind of anti-British thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, we're having this problem because neither side can actually identify what Britishness or as a culture, as an identity is anymore. And some people on the right will come out and be like, "Oh, boys, the values of the justice system, free market, and it's democracy, and all these are the traits. These are the benefits of it, and not what it is." Every tribe and every nation has an identity. They hide behind something. Whether it's the Revolutionary French, it's the flag. In America, it's also similar. In this country, we had it. It was the monarchy, it's constitutional monarchy. It's our identity, but we just got lost it. We have to bring it back in the sense that every tribe and every nation has to belong to something. We don't really have. We're not living in an anarcho-libertarian society where you're just on your own. We have to obviously belong to something. And
so
then that's the problem.
we've just realised we've only got 10 minutes left, so let's make them short and snappy, nice and concise.
We're giving you 30 seconds.
We're going to get to as many questions as possible.
Just to return that there's been the long march of liberalism through institutions once again, and when you have cultural Marxists who don't want to have Britishness or identity and want to reduce people to what does it mean to be British. Cultural Marxists in education in particular want to reduce because people are afraid and people are reluctant to acknowledge their own history, don't care about it, and want to reduce it into a nothingness. That is the problem. Where are the conservatives in academia? There are none, because people are afraid. Cancel culture once again. So liberalism, not even so much leftism, but liberalism within institutions is the issue.
Speaking as a conservative, speaking as a conservative in academia, the one thing that the government should not have done to target free speech, enemies of free speech in academia, was to then ban publications that are anti-capitalist. This was something that they did over the last 6 months. That's the problem answering the problem. I know that's not a constructive answer, but that's what the government should not be doing. If anyone's listening from the government, stop doing that.
All right, Boris, how are you doing?
Kieran? Hell, why are you all in the front row?
To intimidate.
You're doing a good job.
Thank you.
Immigration.
Yeah, just to piggyback off Sam's point.
Oh,
about,
do you have to?
Yeah, the importance of immigration. And this government's kind of elected on this immigration reform, all about Brexit. I was just going to ask the panel, what do you think the net number annually should be, and has Priti Patel failed as Home Secretary?
I want an exact number and
Good.
yes or no. Yes or no.
Pick a side. We're not Keir Starmer.
An exact number. That's all I want.
Priti Patel has failed, and the net figure should be negative. I don't know the exact amount, but it should.
Right.
I'd probably put somewhere upwards of 50,000, not including, for example, things like refugees, etc. And yes, entirely.
She has failed.
Yes.
You can't give a complete number because what happens when you reach that? You can say keep it low, but you can't give a complete number.
Has she failed?
Keep it low.
Has she failed?
You can bring it down, but if you're going to give a complete number,
She failed. Of course she failed.
Ground all the airplanes.
It's not your turn. Has she failed?
Pardon?
Has she failed?
No.
No.
Ooh.
No.
Shazam currently my boss, so I'm not.
Okay, fair enough. No comment. Fair enough.
Jake took the words out of my mouth.
Right now, because of the situation, fewer than 10,000, and also it's not just the numbers, it's also the type of people. We can't just bring people. And we need to kick people out. The ones who are here legally.
Has she failed?
Absolutely, definitely.
Right.
They all failed. All parties, all governments.
Alice.
All of them.
Yes, she's failed, and I want more Catholic South Americans.
I'm scared to ask, but Samuel?
Numbers in the negative, sack Priti Patel, she's useless.
Okay, next question is from Alexander, and it's who is each of the panelists' favourite former Prime Minister? And I just want a name, please. Jake.
Lord Salisbury.
Oh, Tony, no. Thatcher.
Sorry, I shouldn't have laughed so much.
Theresa May.
Thatcher.
Anthony Eden.
Yeah. Sir Robert Peel.
Saint Dunstan.
Israeli.
He was alive in the 900s.
Wait, Casey, I'd actually like to know, why is it Theresa May? Sorry, just because it's a bit more of an unusual answer.
I think, however you attack her, she was the one who got Brexit done. She didn't pass it, but this deal.
No, I'm sorry, that is a fallacy.
Tell
That
me
is
how
absolute
does this
fallacy.
deal differ from Boris's? It doesn't. It is
We
the
can
exact
work
same.
it.
All
Let
he's
him
done.
speak. Theresa the
All he's
Appeaser.
done.
Guys,
Never
let him
happened.
speak,
All he's
please.
done is
Respect.
press copy and paste. That's all he's done. He got it passed, but that's all he's done.
I'm impartial. Okay. Sorry, do you want to, that's just thrown me a little bit. Yes, Mark, are we wrapping up now? I don't read mine. What?
One more.
One more. Who's got the best question here?
He does.
One
from the
Oh,
back.
no, on the back.
Okay, right, fine. Just
Two,
a quick
two,
two
two.
questions. Quick.
We've talked about government being encouraging. How do we effectively limit government?
Okay, quick answers.
Constitutional monarchism.
Very quick.
You can't give a quick answer.
Has to be Catholic though.
Okay, hang on. Saoirse? We don't.
We don't.
Casey?
Democracy.
Democracy.
No heckling. Sorry.
That's rude.
Sorry.
Absolute monarchy.
Introduce free market capitalism. Get rid of a central banking system.
Alice?
I agree, it has to be absolute Catholic monarchy.
And again, I'm
Once
scared.
more into the Pope.
I'm very scared, but Samuel?
Constitutional monarchy ruled by the polymaths and the culture men.
Gentleman at the back, last
There's always
question.
one.
Yeah, last question.
Oh, no.
Alice said there was nothing that we could do to combat the leftist work agenda in universities. Casey also said that we have to stop on the culture wars. How are we going to solve the problem if we have to stop the culture wars and there's nothing done about
War
it?
with France. That's
Can't arrest them all.
Who wants to come in on that very quickly, or should we go round again?
Defund the lowest performing third of universities and threaten all departments with defunding if they don't adhere to free speech.
I think you've got a new fan at the front.
Oh, they're my guys.
They all in a space together last night.
Well, I couldn't sum it up any better than that, really.
Fantastic. Casey?
You reduce fees and you stop these culture wars.
No?
I don't know because I feel like if we go saying we're going to defund and everything, I don't know the type of response we'd get. I don't know if it would just cause a lot more.
Who cares?
Change the culture on going to university, go out, get a job, do something, actually work, do something different, change the world some other way.
Privatize the education system and abolish the culture and media department. It's pointless.
Cancel Ofsted, which are responsible for pretty much most of the leftist narratives in schools. They're partnered with Stonewall. No one knows much about them, but they have grown insanely over the last decade.
Now wait for it. Wait for something about it.
Make universities elitist again.
Brilliant.
It's literally Simon Cowell on the edge.
Yeah, so I guess we'll now go round and sum up just very briefly. If you just want to add any final points or closing remarks.
Bear in mind that the topic is talking about the Conservative Party and its forward-looking future. Okay, so if there's anything you really want to interject saying this is what we must or should do.
I feel like I've made enough of a point,
Like
really.
it.
I hate democracy. I want to...
So what would you replace democracy with?
Well, parliamentarianism is not as like the single authoritative legislative chamber of the nation. I'd rather we had a constitutional monarchy which Parliament was advisory to, but by no means was the final chamber. We've gutted the judiciary, we've gutted the Lords. Why on earth is Parliament the single legislative organ of this whole country?
So you would scrap democracy?
No. Democracy is a logic. I hate democracy as a logic. I like.
So what would you do to move forward? That's the point of this. That's the reason why we're here.
Okay, right. Reintroduce the law lords. Reintroduce the Lords spiritual.
Yes.
Reintroduce the Lords as the final veto chamber. And have the monarch in Parliament as our constitutional.
I would say we had a wonderful question about are the British socially conservative, and then went straight to a question about how much we love socialised healthcare. So without a hint of irony, we need to stop pandering, and we need to start, less polling, less what does the man in the red wall think, and more, we've got a vision, we've got a plan,
this is what we're going to do, like everyone else.
Casey, what do we need to do?
If the people who don't want the Conservatives to win, they're free to leave, and let us get on with it.
And do what? Do what?
Why be in a party that you don't like?
I mean, it is a great point. I'm shocked actually at how many people are. I've recognised that people are unhappy with the party, but I didn't actually realise on how big of a scale many people here are. So I mean, it's quite eye-opening to hear everyone's different perspectives, because I mean, we all come from different places, and each policy affects people differently. So I think it's been very.
Can you tell pretty percent
So
how unhappy we are?
And on that,
So what should the party do to move forward? To reunite the clearly divided group?
I think it's interesting what people say about the social conservative and the family values, and there's a lot of social conservative I don't understand, but I think it's definitely something that stands out as a way to
try and
move
reunite the
forward.
values. Okay, fantastic.
Conservatives need to re-engage in ideas, have some convictions, have some backbone. Let's group with ideas. Those who are weak and wobbly, left and whatever, they can realign and move somewhere else. But we need to regroup and
Back to
try
basics.
back to basics
Right.
and try social conservatism. It hasn't been tried for the last how many years? Try it.
Hi,
It's
Lucy.
Well, as I said earlier, you need to completely bring down all the political parties, the whole system that we have, and restart from beginning, and make Conservative Party conservative again.
Alice, what needs to be done?
I agree a lot with Luke. We need more spine. We need more faith in Britain as a country and as a nation. And I think there is always hope. So yeah, Ave Christus Dex.
And our last word from Mr. Martin.
Realise that the Jacobins have taken over the palace and everything else. Stop being a managerial declinist and embrace conservative revolution.
And on that note,
what a way to wrap up the debate. Who better?
Should we go around thank everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to start?
Wait, we're thanking
everyone.
Thank you so much to everyone that attended, and also thank you all to our lovely panellists. I'll go around name by name and everyone give them a nice cheer, so we're all friends at the end. Jake Scott. And thank you to everyone for watching on our live stream.
Yes, and Joseph and all the team here, thank you so much. And Birmingham Post.